In the cold stone halls of medieval castles, where power was displayed through crowns, jewels, and armies, there existed a secret ritual, a ritual so private, so humiliating, that it was spoken of only in whispers, and yet it held the power to decide the fate of a kingdom. This was the virginity test, a cruel trial forced upon queens and noblewomen. Picture this: a young princess, perhaps just 14 or 15 years old, brought to a foreign land for marriage. Her wedding day is filled with trumpets, banners, and cheers. The people celebrate the union, believing it will bring peace, alliances, or heirs. But beneath the surface, the real test has yet to begin. Because in the eyes of kings, councils, and even priests, her worth is tied not to her wisdom, not to her kindness, not to her courage, but to whether she is pure. And so, the night of her wedding, when she should have felt safety and love, becomes a trial. For in the morning, the world will demand proof of her virginity, proof that she is untouched, proof that her body belongs only to her husband. How was this proof measured? Sometimes, by the presence of blood on the marriage sheets, servants would collect the linen, parade it through the halls, and present it to the court. Imagine that. The most intimate act of a woman's life turned into a public display for the sake of politics. And if the blood was not there, then came suspicion, whispers, accusations. A queen's entire reputation could crumble overnight. In other cases, midwives, priests, or even royal physicians were called. Their task? To examine the young bride's body, searching for signs of a hymen, as though flesh could tell a story. The examinations were invasive, degrading, and terrifying. And yet, everyone pretended they were a science. But we know now, science says otherwise. A hymen may tear from riding a horse, from dancing, even from childhood injuries. Sometimes it remains intact, even after intimacy. There is no truth in it, and yet, for medieval queens, it was everything. Think of the fear that gripped these women. Their crowns glittered, their gowns sparkled, but in their hearts, they trembled. They were trapped in a world where a single rumor, a single doubt, could destroy their lives. A failed test meant more than humiliation. It meant annulment, disgrace, or worse, execution. History is filled with such stories. There were queens who faced whispers on their wedding nights, trembling not from love, but from terror. Some prayed desperately for blood to appear, knowing that without it, their thrones could be lost. Others endured the humiliating touch of strangers, forced to prove themselves before priests who knew nothing of truth. And sometimes, the tests were not about purity at all. They were about power. A king who grew tired of his wife could accuse her of impurity. Rivals could spread rumors to break alliances. Families could be disgraced, dowries lost, wars sparked, all because of a sheet, a whisper, or a false declaration. The virginity test was never really about women. It was about control. Control of dynasties, control of succession, control of women's bodies, turned into tools for politics. And yet, the cruelty ran deeper. For these queens were not faceless names in books. They were young women, with fears, with hopes, with hearts that longed for love. Behind the silks and jewels, they were human. Imagine their tears, shed in silence after being paraded before strangers. Imagine their voices, silenced when they tried to protest. Imagine the weight of a crown that brought not freedom, but chains. One can almost hear their thoughts. Will they believe me? Will they call me pure? Will I be cast aside tomorrow? Their lives were like walking a thin line between honor and ruin, and no matter how kind, intelligent, or noble they were, their fate rested on a test they could never control. As centuries passed, some women managed to outwit this cruel system. Stories tell of queens who bribed midwives, of families who doctored sheets with animal blood, of courts where politics outweighed suspicion. But many were not so fortunate. Many suffered in silence, erased from history, not because they lacked virtue, but because they could not prove it. And perhaps the most tragic truth of all is that these women's voices were never heard. Their pain was buried beneath chronicles that spoke of kings and battles, treaties and wars. Rarely do we read of the silent trials faced by queens, trials that were every bit as real as the wars fought on bloody fields. Today, when we look back at these stories, we feel anger, outrage. How could they? How could entire kingdoms reduce a woman's worth to her body to a meaningless test? But before we sigh in relief that such times are gone, we must face a darker truth. And so, the story of these queens is not just history. It is a warning, a reminder of how power can twist truth, a reminder of how women's voices can be silenced, their lives controlled, their humanity denied. But there is also something else hidden in their stories, something powerful. For despite the fear, despite the cruelty, despite the humiliation, these women endured. They walked into courts filled with suspicion. They survived marriages built on politics. They raised children, carried dynasties, and left their mark on history, even when the world tried to erase them. Perhaps their greatest strength was not in passing a test, but in enduring it. Not in proving their purity, but in surviving a world that refused to see them as more than vessels. So when we picture medieval queens today, let us not only see the crowns, the gowns, the jewels. Let us also see the hidden pain, the trembling hands, the silent tears. Let us remember the trials they faced behind closed doors, trials more cruel than any battlefield. And let us say, their story matters, their dignity matters, their voices matter, because history is not just the story of kings and wars. It is also the story of women, forced to prove themselves in ways no human should. And in remembering them, we honor their strength.